When things get a little hectic for me and in my busy world, I have to touch the forest, as I like to say. It's a good spiritual connection.
There's a beauty, but there's also a harshness to it. It's like the smell of hot sand attracts me. It's so much part of my genetic makeup.
What comes to my mind is the slogan we have on the state forest about space, solitude, and self-reliance. I think that's one of the things that our visitors really enjoy.
This is Calamintha ashai. If you see this plant right here, then more than likely you're on high ground and you're probably in the ancient island scrub.
I couldn't have been older than 4 years old, and I have this memory of this really mystical place, and the shadows and the moss hanging and the water with crabs swimming along the bottom.
Even though life was harsh at some points, even though it was difficult and challenging and even in some cases cost them their lives, there must have been that same magic when the sun was going down over the longleaf pines.
Oh Lord, with the bounty, please look down on Marion County. The soil is so poor and so rooty too. I don't know what us poor folks are going to do.
If there can be such a thing as instinctual memory, the consciousness of land and water must lie deeper in the core of us than any knowledge of our fellow beings. We cannot live without the earth or apart from it, and something is shriveled in man's heart when he turns away from it and concerns himself only with the affairs of men. Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings, 1938.
You can touch the forest, but don't touch the gators or the bears. The Florida Black Bear Scenic Byway was named after the Florida black bear, which is representative of the numerous endangered species in the Ocala. Black bears, little gators, panthers, turtles, fox, big gators, scrub jays, double-crested cormorants, even bigger gators. Did I mention the gators? It's not the gators that are endangered here. The Florida Black Bear Scenic Byway crisscrosses through the Ocala National Forest and hundreds of acres of conservation lands, rivers, lakes, and forests. While a lot of old natural Florida is being plowed up, built over, and strip mauled away, here along the Florida Black Bear Scenic Byway, you can still find acres and acres and miles of natural and often wild Florida. You can discover a lot of wild Florida along this byway, from the wild animals, to the sprawling natural habitat, to the rowdy history of the daring pioneers who came here. The 113-mile byway runs east-west along State Road 40 from Ormond Beach in Volusia County to Silver Springs in Marion County, and north-south along State Road 19 from Palatka in Putnam County to Umatilla in Lake County. And it includes a couple of additional lakes along County Road 445 and the two forest roads out to Fort Gates Ferry. Ecotourism is at the heart of this byway, drawing visitors who want to appreciate authentic local culture and nature with minimal impact on the natural surroundings. The byway was designated a National Scenic Byway on the strength of its recreational sites and natural resources. There are over 100 sites along this byway. In this video, we'll introduce you to a few of them and talk to people along the way about the stories of the area. These are the 4 kinds of travelers who will introduce you to the treasures of this byway. This land calls out for hardy souls who like to blaze a trail. There are many exciting opportunities to rough it here in the Big Scrub. From ancient tribal people, the Timucuan, Mayacan, and Seminoles, to the early Spanish explorers in the 1500s, and the early settlers and crackers in the 1800s. Plenty of adventurers came here, drawn by the land, the water, and the wildlife. One of the area's unique modern adventurers was Ross Allen. He developed his Reptile Institute at Silver Springs in the 1930s. Today, Reptile Island at Silver Springs is named in his honor. He entertained crowds for years with his reptile shows, wrestling gators, milking snakes, all the things your mom told you not to do.
At one of our forest meetings, he came to it with a suitcase. He didn't know what he had in the suitcase.
Right.
He just opened the suitcase and had about 4 or 5 rattlesnakes, and he'd take one out at a time.
Dana St. Clair is a local author who grew up in Ocala, and his father helped Ross Allen build the Boys Ranch just north of Silver Springs.
I learned a lot from some of the best. Ross Allen in particular taught me directly and indirectly how to survive in the Florida wilds. He had this passion for teaching survival.
Jim Kern was the visionary behind the Florida Trail, now designated a National Scenic Trail. The 1,800-mile trail crosses the byway a few times in the Ocala National Forest. With over 60 miles just in the Ocala, the trail provides plenty of adventure for hikers and backpackers.
The fact that we hunted wild cattle is why we were called cow hunters rather than cowboys. At the end of a drive, it was customary for cow hunters to ride their horses into saloons. It was partially just for show, partially because actually after hours in the saddle, you're really, really stiff. And it was a lot more comfortable if you'd go in, take your first couple of drinks from horseback to limber up so you can dismount. It started in Kissimmee. One enterprising saloon keeper got tired of replacing doors, so he made a door that was both tall and wide enough to ride a horse through, and that became common practice in the interior of Florida for decades.
There are equestrian trails, and the Tram Road equestrian area in Tiger Bay State Forest is outfitted with campsites, corrals, and other equestrian amenities. If you have that adventurer spirit and are interested in off-road adventures, the trails, rivers, lakes, and forests here will provide you with a plethora of backwoods adventure. Many a storyteller has fallen under the spell of this byway, with its rich, deep lore dating back centuries.
Now, we've been driving cattle with whips for several centuries before somebody figured this out. But this connection I'm doing with my arm, that makes the tip of the whip travel faster than the speed of sound. That tip incidentally is called a cracker or a popper. What you're hearing is a tiny sonic boom. Cattle hate that sound, they shy away from it. It makes it easy to get them into camp.
Rick Tunyon is a local novelist who spent 15 years researching the cattle industry in the area to write his novel, Guns of the Palmetto Plains.
I was doing a story on the Florida cattle industry, and I read a book by Professor Joe Ackerman, and in that he mentioned the Florida Cattle Guard, or Cow Cavalry, which was a militia unit formed during the war between the states to protect and drive the herds from here to the rest of the South. And it just struck me, hey, that is my subject matter for a book.
Here we are in the front porch of a cracker house in the middle of the Florida August summer heat. And I'm actually pretty cool. There's a reason for this. It's all about the architecture. They were all designed to keep the occupants as cool as possible. The cracker occupants spent a lot of time out on the front porch, and very often they ate here, they met here, they played music, they danced here into the evening. It was one of the coolest places in the house. Large and often paired windows for cross ventilation, and sometimes a corridor through the middle of the house, a breezeway that was designed to keep the middle of the house cool. Crackers called those dog trots. For very good reasons, dogs used to trot up and down them. Anything that they could do to shelter themselves from the harsh summer heat. And that includes parking the houses under big shade trees.
There are two places along the byway that help preserve the buildings and crafts of the Crackers. At the Barberville Pioneer Settlement for the Arts, you'll find one of the byway's hidden gems. The folks here have been preserving local buildings, arts and crafts, music and traditions for years.
What defines a Cracker might not even be so much your ethnicity as where you live and what you do when you're living there. And by what you do, I don't mean occupation. I mean your independence, your self-reliance.
Monso Tatum grew up in the area, and his grandfather managed crews for the turpentine stills. This is the one at the Barberville settlement.
Okay, this is a turpentine still, and the rosin came through a series of filters into this trough where it was dipped into molds.
Regular annual festivals provide music, demonstrations, and people in period clothes to help bring the Cracker experience to life. Another place on the byway to see period-related buildings and festivals is at the Silver River State Park. Situated near the Silver River, there is camping, cabins for rent, and a museum. The Cracker Village buildings preserved here replicate life in the Ocala in the late 1800s.
There's nothing like the sights and the senses in the touching and experiencing firsthand all of these things that are of our, not only of our yesteryears, but of our current life experiences of being in the woods and on the river.
This is a rare byway with a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel inspired about its culture. Marjorie Kinnan Rollins was so intrigued by the area and the local Crackers that she moved here in the 1930s. For 2 years, she spent time on Pat's Island and in Astor and Volusia listening to stories that would eventually become part of her novel, The Yearling. Richard Mills grew up in the area, became a forester in the Ocala, and retired here. He remembers Marjorie.
But anyway, when Marjorie Rollins ended up, she was a New Yorker, or that is, and a man told me, when I told him all she did, he said, I can't, that's not the same woman. She wore white gloves. She wore high heel shoes. She was an office lady. Well, I wonder about that because she went native, that's for sure. Then, of course, she met this bootlegger, Leonard Fitty. He took her to Pat's Island, and he introduced her to the Long, Cow Long. Cow Long then tells her all these stories. Then he told her about the pet deer, and that did it. That's what she was looking for.
Pat's Island is not an island in the water, but an island in the forest habitat. You can hike the Yearling Trail and see many of the novel's locations and visit the cemetery of some of the actual characters upon whom the novel was based. Across the road at Silver Glen Springs, you can walk the Boyles Trail and see the setting for the novel's opening chapter. The Academy Award-winning film of The Yearling was shot partially on location on the byway in 1946. The naturalists and conservationists of all ages have had a passion for this land, and we owe them thanks for fighting to preserve it in the untouched state we enjoy today.
The circles are the bear kills.
Black bear fatalities along this roadway were one of several reasons why local forestry people, conservationists, and concerned citizens have worked to help protect endangered species like the black bear, the Florida panther, scrub jays, and others. The scrub jay is a rare bird that is unique to this habitat.
There's one right there.
Jim Thorson was a forest ranger here in the Ocala for a number of years before retiring.
And this is the type of habitat that they prefer. They like a low understory vegetation with very little canopy, because the canopy is when the Cooper's hawks and the other predators come in, and that's what they don't like.
Jim now does consulting and is a major advocate and volunteer for the Florida Black Bear Scenic Byway.
The area that we're looking at right here is a high elevation area in what is known as the ancient island scrub. When everything else was an ocean all around us 3 million years ago, this was probably an island, a sand dune that was stuck out in the ocean. And there's certain plants that grow on here that usually don't grow anyplace else. And one of them is the Calamenthae ashii, which is commonly called the scrub mint. And if you pull off there a stem and you roll the leaves up, it's almost like a mint, and it smells very good.
Back in the days when the Native Americans were here, there was a huge shell mound, probably 20 feet high. There may have been 35 acres here, according to some of the early archaeologists. The middens indicate these large shell areas that were formed from the St. Johns River. It was a freshwater shell, and they would brew the broth and use the flesh from the snail, and the shells over thousands of years accrued to a midden that was as much as 20 feet high. It was just part of their sort of kitchen garbage heap.
Kathy Lowenstein is another local Forest Service ranger who also is a member of the Florida Black Bear Scenic Byway Committee.
A lot of the concern is what the impacts of the road is on the natural resources themselves, whether there's fragmentation of wildlife, difficulty in conducting the prescribed burns that are really necessary to keep that natural community functioning the way it is.
Among the planned byway improvements are measures to prevent roadkills to bears and other wildlife. Raised roadways, easements, fences, and under-the-road tunnels designed specifically for wildlife are some of the protection measures. This whole area would probably be less natural if not for the efforts of Marjorie Harris Carr. There were plans to build a barge canal across the state, which would have devastated the fragile ecosystem of the area. For over 15 years, Marjorie Harris Carr led the charge to stop the barge canal. Both Marjorie and her husband Archie Carr were noted and influential conservationists who contributed to the preservation of the Ocala in its natural state. In honor of her efforts, the Cross Florida Greenway was named after her. This is Chris Kincaid, another local Forest Service ranger.
There's a lot of things I love about Florida, and particularly this area of the state here in Central Florida, but the vast wetlands and the river systems are just really incredible. The wildlife is out of this world. People come from all over the world to Florida just to see some of the lesser known species. Out of all the places I've been, the wildlife here in Florida is probably the best that I've seen.
In the 1700s, William Bartram came through here passionately cataloging the native plants, wildlife, and tribal people of the area. The local Indians called him the flower hunter, and his euphoric accounts brought worldwide attention to the beauty and mystery of the area. In the 1800s, many people started to discover this wild land. During the 1870s and 1880s, steamboats brought tourists up the St. Johns and Ocklawaha rivers. This is still a marvelous spot to unplug and unwind.
The people coming down in the steamboat days would stop off here at Bluffton or Orange Bluff and then put in to a smaller skiff that would go on down to De Leon Springs to the resort.
There are several world-class springs along the byway.
Juniper Creek. That's the most perfect water I think I've ever been in my life. The water is not cold, it's there by the bridge.
You're talking about Juniper Wayside there?
Yeah, Wayside.
On 19.
Silver Springs, Alexander Springs, Juniper Springs, Fern Hammock Springs, Silver Glen Springs, and Salt Springs. Each has its own unique features and charms. Yes, Those are blue crabs swimming around at Salt Springs. Marine life in an inland spring? Yep. It's evidence of a large part of Florida being underwater a long, long time ago. It can get pretty hot here in the summer. Even this grasshopper made sure he stayed in the shade on his trip down these steps. So visitors and local folks come to swim in the refreshing crystal clear water of the springs.
Here we are at Jan and Al's River Park Cafe along the Scenic Byway, and we're sampling some real cracker food here. Here's the mystery of grits that not very many people know. It's not a grain, it's not a rice, it's not barley, it's actually ground corn. This was the cracker staple for a long time. Even at the poorest of times, you could always grind corn and make grits. Now it's become a delicacy. You go into restaurants these days and you pay lots of money for grits. I call it the revenge of the crackers. This is how you eat them at lunchtime and dinner time. Never as a breakfast cereal. But if you're a real cracker, you eat these things as a side dish with lots of butter on top of them. Not margarine, but real butter. You just have to drown the grits. Real southern grits.
Florida's oldest tourist attraction is on the west end of the byway, Silver Springs Nature Park. This is one place you are guaranteed to see wildlife. Up close and personal. Look for the rhesus monkeys in the trees along the Silver River. Originally brought here in the late 1930s, the monkeys have since gone rogue. Other TV shows and movies have been shot here over the years, including the 1960s hit TV show Sea Hunt and the horror classic Creature from the Black Lagoon. Cowhunters, crackers, and conservationists. The story of this byway is a clash of colorful characters. At one time, the area was called the land nobody wanted. Today, like many of the National Forest lands, it's the land of many uses. It's the delicate balance of man working with nature that has helped restore and preserve these forests, rivers, lakes, and springs, and their wildlife. The Florida Black Bear Scenic Byway is a place to experience parts of Florida that are much like they were decades ago. It's an ecotourism wonderland of greenways and blueways. Come visit the Florida Black Bear Scenic Byway and touch the forest. Discover the wild Florida that has been calling to adventurers, historians, naturalists, and vacationers for centuries.
Did you hear the cracker conjunctive? Jeff used a couple of them. One of them was can't, which is a combination of can't and ain't, can't. But he also said when he tipped the canoe, he didn't tip it and he didn't dunk it. He tunked it, the canoe. Did you hear him say that? All right, that was a new one for me right there. That's the thing about the cracker lexicon. If there isn't a word, then you just make it up.
The Fort Gates Ferry is another unique feature of the byway. In operation since the Civil War, the ferry takes you across Little Lake George for $10 a car.
You ever eat swamp cabbage?
Oh, I love swamp cabbage.
I heard it was really good.
It's really good.